The champagne was expensive, but it tasted like iron in my mouth. We were celebrating my husband's promotion to senior partner at his law firm. Our house, a beautiful and carefully restored 1920s craftsman, was filled with the loud laughter of people who only knew my name because it was attached to his. I had spent years being the perfect wife, the one who organized the parties and kept the silver polished. I stood in the kitchen, smoothing the linen napkins and checking the appetizers one last time. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and success. Everything looked perfect on the outside, just like I had designed it to be. I was about to walk into the dining room when I heard his voice coming from the study. The door was cracked open just an inch. I stopped moving, my hand frozen on the tray. It wasn't the words themselves that hit me first, but the tone. It was a voice he never used with me, a voice full of genuine passion and excitement. I leaned in closer, my heart hammering against my ribs, suddenly feeling like a stranger in my own home. "It was always her, man," my husband Presley was saying to his best friend. I froze in the hallway, the cold tile beneath my feet feeling like ice. Presley is 38, a man who prides himself on his logic and his sharp legal mind. He was talking with a casual cruelty that made my blood run cold. "Living with Rhea is comfortable," he continued, and I could almost hear the shrug in his voice. "She's stable. She fixed my credit when I was underwater, and she handled every single detail of this renovation. But now that I've finally made partner, I don't need a project manager anymore. I want my fire back. I want Vanessa." The silence that followed in the study felt heavier than the noise from the party. His friend said something I couldn't hear, but Presley just laughed. It was the laugh of a man who thought he had already won the game. He didn't know I was standing right there, hearing every word of his betrayal. He didn't know that the comfortable life he was so ready to discard was the only thing keeping him afloat. "My name is Rhea. I am 34 years old, and by trade, I am a forensic accountant. This means I am trained to look past the surface and find the hidden truth in the numbers. Apparently, in my marriage, I had merely been a project manager. I didn't drop the tray of appetizers I was holding, and I didn't scream. My professional training kicked in. I became cold and analytical. I simply walked back to the kitchen sink, rinsed a single glass, and looked at my reflection in the window. My face looked the same, but everything inside had shifted. I realized in that heartbeat that I had spent 6 years of my life being the scaffolding for a building that didn't actually want me inside it. I had supported Presley through his darkest financial times and his most stressful career moves. I had built a foundation for him to stand on, only for him to use that height to look for someone else. I stayed quiet, moving back to the guests with a mask of calm. The long game had officially begun, and Presley had no idea I was the one holding the cards. For the next 2 weeks, I watched him like a hawk. I didn't change my behavior at all. I was still the comfortable Rhea he expected. I watched how he tucked his phone away every time I entered the room, his thumb flying to lock the screen. I watched the way he looked at our home. Not as a sanctuary we had built together through sweat and tears, but as a prize he had earned all by himself. He walked through the halls with a new kind of arrogance, touching the crown molding I had picked out as if he had carved it himself. He didn't know that when we bought this fixer-upper during his massive debt crisis, his signature wasn't the one that mattered at the closing table. He had been so buried in legal fees and past mistakes that he was a liability. I had stepped up, using my own resources and my own credit to secure our future. He had been so relieved back then that he didn't care about the details. Now, those details were the only thing that mattered. I kept my silence, observing his every move, waiting for the inevitable moment he would try to discard me. I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon to find a large suitcase sitting in the middle of the hallway. It wasn't mine. It was expensive, designer leather, and it smelled of a heavy floral perfume I didn't own. My heart didn't even race. I had expected this. I walked into the kitchen and saw Vanessa. She was sitting at my breakfast nook, looking smug and sipping tea from my grandmother's delicate china. She looked exactly like the fire Presley wanted, loud, bright, and expensive. Presley stood right behind her, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder in a gesture of ownership. He didn't look guilty. He looked like a man who was finally taking what he deserved. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock I had bought for our first anniversary. They both looked at me as I walked in, and I could see the rehearsed speech in Presley's eyes. He had probably practiced this with her, laughing about how I would react. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. I just set my keys down on the counter and waited for him to speak. "Rhea, we need to be adults about this," Presley said, his voice sounding practiced and incredibly cold. He stepped forward, but he didn't take his hand off Vanessa. "I've realized I can't live a lie anymore. Vanessa is back, and she's staying here with me. I'll give you a month to find a new apartment. I'll even pay the first 2 months' rent to help you get settled. It's my house, but I want to be fair to you." I looked at him, marveling at his delusion. He truly believed he was being generous. He truly believed that this house, the one I had saved from foreclosure and spent years renovating, belonged to him, just because his name was on the mailbox. Vanessa sat there, tilting her head and watching me with a fake expression of sympathy. She thought she had won the grand prize. She thought she was stepping into a ready-made life of luxury. I didn't correct him. I didn't tell him he had no right to kick me out of a property I owned. I just stood there, letting the silence grow until it became uncomfortable for them. I looked at the way Vanessa smirked. It was a look of pure triumph. She was already scanning the kitchen, probably deciding which of my things she was going to throw away first. Then I looked at Presley, who suddenly couldn't even meet my eyes. For all his talk of being an adult, he was a coward at heart. I didn't tell him about the deed sitting safely in the deposit box at the bank. I didn't tell him about the large inheritance from my aunt that had covered the entire down payment when he was completely insolvent and drowning in debt. I didn't mention that I had spent the last 6 years paying the property taxes and the insurance from my private account. I just gave a slow, measured nod. "I understand," I said softly. "I'll start packing my things." The relief on his face was almost pathetic. He thought it was over. He thought he had successfully managed me one last time. He had no idea that I wasn't leaving because he told me to. I was leaving to prepare the stage for his final act. He thought my compliance was a sign of weakness. To him, I was just the stable wife who would do what she was told to avoid a fight. For the next 3 weeks, I moved my life out of that house in small, organized boxes. I did it quietly while they were at work or out for dinner. I watched them pick out new, bright paint colors for their bedroom, replacing the calming tones I had chosen. I even watched them host small celebratory dinners for the other partners at the firm, acting as if they were the king and queen of the neighborhood. I sat in the corner of the house, the invisible ghost of a wife, taking meticulous notes on every single improvement they made. Every time they changed a light fixture or bought new furniture, I recorded it. I was a forensic accountant after all. I knew that every penny they spent on a house they didn't own was just more money they were handing over to me. They were so blinded by their own excitement that they never stopped to wonder why I was being so incredibly helpful. As a forensic accountant, I simply don't miss details. It is my job to find what people try to hide. While Presley was busy showing off his new fiancée, I spent every one of my lunch breaks at the county clerk's office. I gathered every document, every filing, and every proof of payment. Because Presley had been in the middle of a messy, expensive lawsuit when we first bought the house, he had insisted vehemently that the property be put in my name only. He wanted to protect our assets from any potential judgment against him. In his mind, it was a temporary legal shield. But over the years, as his career took off and his ego grew, he had completely forgotten that he never actually added his name to the title. I had not forgotten. I held the sole legal right to the dirt, the bricks, and the roof over his head. I watched him walk across the hardwood floors I owned, feeling a cold sense of justice growing in my chest. He was a squatter in a tuxedo, and the clock was ticking down to 0. The firm was hosting a massive partners' welcome dinner at our house to celebrate the new promotions. It was the biggest event of the year for Presley. He wanted to officially debut Vanessa as his new fiancée to all his colleagues and the senior leadership. He pulled me aside on Wednesday and told me I needed to be completely moved out by Friday morning. "It would be awkward if you were still lingering here, Rhea," he said, not even looking at me. "For everyone involved. I want a fresh start, and having your boxes in the hallway just doesn't fit the vibe." Everyone involved. I want a fresh start, and having your boxes in the hallway just doesn't fit the vibe. He spoke about me as if I were a piece of old furniture he was sending to the dump. Vanessa was in the background, humming to herself as she polished the silver I had bought. I didn't argue. I didn't tell him that he was the one who didn't fit the vibe of my home. I just looked at him and promised him that I would be out by the time the guests arrived. I intended to keep that promise, but not in the way he expected. I didn't just leave quietly like a wounded animal. Instead, I made a very specific professional move. I called the senior managing partner of Presley's firm, a man named Mr. Abernathy. He was an old-school lawyer who valued integrity and character above all else. I didn't call to complain or to cry about my marriage. I spoke to him as a professional colleague. I simply asked for a private meeting regarding property assets and firm liability related to one of his new partners. I knew that the firm's bylaws had very strict rules about financial transparency and personal conduct. If a partner was living in a house he claimed to own, but actually didn't, it created a massive ethical and legal headache for the firm. I presented Mr. Abernathy with the facts. No emotion, just the deed and the promissory notes. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he looked at the documents. He thanked me for my discretion and professionalism. He told me he would see me at the dinner on Friday night. I knew then that the trap was set. I spent my final hours in the house packing the things that actually mattered. I took the art I had carefully curated over the years. I took the heavy, handmade rugs I had spent months weaving by hand. By Thursday night, the house looked like a hollow, echoing shell. It was stripped of its warmth and its history. Presley and Vanessa were too busy buying modern, cold furniture to even notice the change. They were so focused on the surface that they didn't realize the soul of the home was gone. They were replacing my history and my hard work with gold-plated plastic and cheap mirrors. Vanessa was prancing around, talking about how they would finally make the place look expensive. I watched them from the doorway, feeling a strange sense of pity. They were building a life on a foundation of lies and stolen credit. They thought they were moving up in the world, but they were actually just moving into a trap I had spent weeks carefully laying out for them. I walked out the door for the last time as a resident, carrying only my final briefcase. Friday morning arrived with a cold, clear light. Presley was already in his tuxedo, looking at himself in the mirror and prepping for the biggest party of his life. Vanessa was already dressed in a shimmering gown that looked like it cost more than her car. She was barking orders at the caterers I had originally hired. "Why are you still here?" Presley snapped as I walked toward the front door. He looked at his watch, his face turning red with irritation. "I told you. 10 a.m. sharp, Rhea. The guests will be here soon." I didn't answer him with words. I didn't give him the emotional reaction he wanted. I just reached into my bag and handed him a thick, white manila envelope. "Open this after the guests arrive," I said calmly. "Consider it a parting gift for everything you've done for me." I walked out the door and didn't look back. I went to a hotel down the street, ordered a glass of wine, and waited for the clock to hit 7 p.m. I knew exactly what was about to happen. The party was in full swing by the time I pulled my car back into the driveway. The neighborhood's elite were all there, their luxury cars lining the street. Through the large front windows, I could see Presley holding court in the foyer. He was gesturing wildly, boasting to a group of junior associates about the legacy he was building in this historic home. Vanessa was by his side, playing the part of the perfect, supportive hostess. She was laughing at all the right times and touching people's arms with fake warmth. They looked like the perfect power couple. Then I saw Mr. Abernathy's car pull up. He stepped out, looking grave and professional. He wasn't there for the champagne or the music. He was there to see if the information I had given him was true. I waited for him to go inside, and then I followed him, walking through the front door of my own house, not as a guest, but as the person who was about to bring the whole theater production to an end. Inside, The atmosphere was thick with the smell of expensive catering and ego. Presley spotted Mr. Abernathy and immediately rushed over to hand him a drink. He was talking fast, trying to impress the man who held his career in his hands. Then, Presley remembered the manila envelope I had given him earlier. Thinking it was some kind of sentimental, pathetic goodbye letter he could laugh at later with his friends, he opened it right there near the bar. A few other partners and their wives were standing around watching. His smile was wide as he pulled out the papers, but it vanished instantly. It wasn't a letter. It was a formal, legally binding eviction notice, backed by a certified copy of the sole ownership deed for the property. The bold, black letters at the top of the page were impossible to miss. Notice to vacate. I stood by the door, watching his face. The music seemed to fade into the background as the reality of those documents began to sink into the room. I watched from the edge of the foyer as the color completely drained from Presley's face. He looked like he was about to faint. He scrambled over to one of his lawyer friends, whispering frantically and shoving the papers into the man's hands. The friend took one look at the certified deed, saw my name as the sole owner, and slowly shook his head. "Presley, I don't know what to tell you," the lawyer whispered, but in the sudden hush of the room, his voice carried. "This is her house, every inch of it. Legally, you're just a guest here." Vanessa stepped closer, her eyes wide with confusion. "What do you mean?" "Presley said he bought this house." The guests began to murmur, the sound rising like a tide. The legacy Presley had been bragging about just minutes ago was evaporating in front of everyone. He looked at me then, his eyes full of a mixture of rage and sheer terror. He finally realized that I hadn't been packing my life away. I had been preparing to take it back. I walked further into the room, my heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. I wasn't there as a wife, and I wasn't there as a victim. I was there as the landlord. I didn't raise my voice or cause a scene. I didn't need to. I walked straight up to Mr. Abernathy, who was watching the scene with a look of deep disappointment. "I apologize for the disruption to your evening, sir," I said, my voice steady and clear so everyone could hear. "But as the sole legal owner of this property, I'm afraid I'm terminating Presley's residency effective immediately. He has had more than enough time to make other arrangements." The silence that followed was absolute. Presley tried to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there in his expensive tuxedo, looking like a little boy who had been caught stealing. Vanessa looked like she wanted to disappear into the floorboards. I had given them their adult moment, and now they had to live with the consequences of it in front of every person they cared about impressing. Presley finally found his voice, though it was shaky and thin. He tried to laugh it off, looking around at the guests for support. "It's a marital asset, Rhea. You can't just kick me out of our home. We'll see what a judge says about this." I didn't flinch. I just stepped closer and cut him off softly, making sure Mr. Abernathy was still within earshot. "Actually, Presley, do you remember that loan you took from me 3 years ago to cover your buy-in at the firm? The one you signed a formal promissory note for? You used your supposed interest in this house as collateral, but since the deed shows you have zero legal interest in this house, that loan is now completely unsecured and in immediate default." His eyes went wide. He had forgotten about that paper, too. He had been so sure he would never have to pay me back because we were married. He didn't realize that I kept records of everything. By trying to claim he owned the house, he had just triggered a financial collapse he couldn't stop. Mr. Abernathy's expression turned to stone as he listened to my words. He wasn't just a boss. He was a man who lived by the letter of the law. The firm had a very strict, zero-tolerance policy against partners with unstable financial liabilities or those who engaged in deceptive practices. Presley hadn't just lost a house in front of his peers. He had just signaled to his boss that his entire lifestyle, the cars, the clothes, the house, was a lie built on debt and my generosity. He had stood in that foyer and lied to the senior partner about his legacy. In the legal world, once your credibility is gone, you are finished. I could see the exact moment Mr. Abernathy decided Presley's career at the firm was over. He didn't say a word. He just set his glass down on the table and walked toward the coat rack. The other partners followed his lead, realizing the party was over in every possible way. Presley stood frozen, watching his future walk out the front door. Vanessa, seeing the ship sinking faster than she could run, didn't even try to defend him. She was already clutching her designer purse and looking for the exit. She turned to me, her face pale, and tried to play the victim. "I didn't know any of this, Rhea," she stammered, her voice high and frantic. "He told me he owned everything. He told me he was the one with the money." I looked at her and smiled, a small, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I know he did, Vanessa. He tells a lot of stories to get what he wants." I leaned in slightly. "By the way, you should probably check if that diamond fiancé ring he gave you is actually real. I happened to see the receipt for the cubic zirconia in his desk last week. It wasn't a lie. I had seen it while I was gathering my documents." Vanessa's hand flew to her ring finger, her face twisting in horror. She didn't stay for another second. She turned and ran out the door, leaving Presley standing alone in the middle of the empty foyer. "You can't kick me out tonight. It's illegal." Presley hissed at me, his face inches from mine. All the charm was gone, replaced by a desperate, ugly anger. I leaned in close, my voice a whisper that only he could hear. "The contractors you hired to rip out my kitchen and put in that modern eyesore? You put the deposits on my secondary credit card because yours was maxed out. I've already disputed those charges as unauthorized, Presley. I told them you had no authority to use my credit or my property. They're on their way to pick up the new appliances tomorrow morning because they haven't been paid for." He looked at the kitchen, then back at me, realization dawning on him. He was broke, he was homeless, and he was about to lose the very things he had used to replace me. He had tried to build a new life using my money, and I had simply pulled the plug. He was left standing in a house that was about to be stripped bare, with no way to stop it. Suddenly, my father-in-law stepped forward. He was a wealthy, arrogant man who had always looked down on me, treating me like a boring secretary. Presley had picked up by mistake. "Now hold on, Rhea," he said, pulling out his checkbook. "This has gone far enough. I'll write you a check for whatever Presley owes you right now. Let's not be dramatic in front of people." I didn't take the check. Instead, I handed him a second manila envelope I had been holding. "You might want to read this before you sign anything," I said quietly. He opened it, and I watched his face change from arrogance to pure fury. It was a copy of a co-signed document for a luxury boat Presley had bought 6 months ago. Presley had forged his father's signature on the paperwork. I'd found the original practice sheets in the shredder pile weeks ago. The room went dead silent as his own father realized he had been played and defrauded by his own son. He didn't write the check. He just crumpled it up and walked out without a word. The senior partner was now just a man in a tuxedo standing in a foyer he didn't own. He was surrounded by the wreckage of his own lies. His father had abandoned him. His fiancée was already calling an Uber, and his boss was already mentally withdrawing his promotion. He looked small. For the first time in the 6 years I had known him, he looked exactly as small as his character truly was. He had no more fire, no more firewalls, and no more project managers to clean up his mess. He was just a man who had tried to trade a diamond for a piece of glass and ended up with nothing at all. I stood there for a moment, letting him feel the weight of the silence. I didn't need to say, "I told you so." I didn't need to gloat. The documents had said everything that needed to be said. He had spent his life trying to be the smartest person in the room, but he had forgotten that the person who keeps the books always knows the real truth. I didn't stay to watch him cry or beg. I didn't need to see the final collapse. I turned and handed the spare set of keys to a representative from a professional property management firm I had hired 2 weeks ago. "Change every single lock at midnight sharp," I told them. "If he isn't out by then, call the authorities for trespassing." I walked out to my car, feeling lighter than I had in years. I had a new lease already signed for a beautiful penthouse downtown, one with a view of the city and no memories of him. It was paid for by the sale of the modern furniture Presley had bought with his last bonus, a bonus I had legally garnished the day before for his unpaid debts to me. He had bought those velvet sofas and glass tables to impress Vanessa, but in the end, they were the very things that funded my new beginning. I drove away from the craftsman house, leaving the past in the rearview mirror where it belonged. 6 months later, I am sitting in a quiet, sunlit cafe, enjoying a coffee and a book. My life is peaceful, and my bank account is healthy. Presley has reached out multiple times, trying to apologize, trying to negotiate, and trying to blame his stress for everything that happened. I didn't reply to a single message. I didn't need a gotcha moment or a final confrontation to feel whole. I realized that the best revenge wasn't making him homeless or ruining his career, though those things happened as a result of his own actions. The best revenge was making myself completely unavailable to him. I am no longer a project manager for broken men who don't want to be fixed. I am the architect of my own life, and I am building something much stronger this time. I look at the people around me and smile, knowing that I am no longer the scaffolding for someone else's success. I am the owner of my own future, and for the first time, the foundation is solid.